Hi, I'm Mary Poplin with Imagineer Systems, and today we're going to be talking about how to insert a screen insert into a moderately difficult track. Let's get started. First, I'm going to import my footage into Adobe After Effects Creative Cloud. So we're going to go to File, and we're going to find our shot. In this case, we're going to be doing a skateboard jump insert on the top of the skateboard. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag this down into our timeline. We're going to check and see what our settings are. Our settings are 1920 by 1080 at a 1:1 ratio, which is square pixels. It's 104 frames at 23,976 FPS. Now that we have our layer selected, we're going to go ahead to the Animation drop-down menu, and we're going to select Track in Mocha for After Effects. This will bring up Mocha for After Effects, which is a free version of Mocha that ships with Adobe After Effects CS4 through Creative Cloud. Now we're going to check our frame range. 0 to 103 frames is in fact 104 frames. Our frame rate is 23,976, but we still should check. Our pixel aspect ratio is 1:1. Okay, and we don't have to worry about pull down because we're not using interlaced footage, and I recommend that you don't use interlaced footage wherever possible. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. Alright, and now let's scrub through our shot so that we can see what this looks like. So what we're going to try to do is we're actually going to try to put an image on the top of this skateboard. Alright, so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to track the skateboard. Now this is a semi-difficult track because of the flip in the board and the boy's feet. Now, the reason the boy's feet are slightly difficult is because his feet are moving slightly differently than the board. We need to pay attention to that, okay? So we're going to use the bottoms of his feet to track, and then when his feet start to contaminate the track, we're actually going to remove them from the track itself. So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. The first thing we need to do is we need to track this boy's front shoe, okay? So to do that, we're going to find a nice middle section in the shot where his shoe is large in the scene, okay, but not so blurry. We need to make sure that we're tracking from the most amount of data to the least amount of data. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to zoom in, and we're going to find a nice crisp frame. We're going to select X-splines. Now we have Beziers right here if you want them, but we use X-splines mostly in our demos because we like them better. So we're going to use our Create X-spline tool. They also tend to move better with our tracking data. And I'm just going to very quickly do a very loose roto shape right around this boy's foot. Now because this is a multi-planar object and I'm not exactly tracking one plane at a time, I'm not actually going to track perspective, okay? We're going to cheat. What we're trying to do with Mocha is we're trying to track a pattern of pixels that's moving relative to one another. Now that's just a really fancy way of saying that we're tracking a texture that's moving in one direction. So I'm going to select all of these points, just like this, and I'm going to soften this shape a little bit. And what we're going to do is we are going to call this foot track. Okay, and I'm going to turn my thumbnails off. Now, if you notice, every time I roll over this point, I end up getting these thumbnails. If I select a point, you can see I have a previous and next keyframe. I don't need that. All right, so I'm going to track backwards from this point. And you see how my track went off screen? I actually want to follow that. So I'm going to hit Stabilize on, and we're going to watch our shape follow that foot off screen. Now this is actually going to be really helpful for us because we're going to use this to roto our shape. Because Stabilize actually doesn't stabilize your footage, it stabilizes the view screen around your shape that you're tracking. Now the interesting part about that is the tracking shape is actually just where the track is looking. Okay, it will also define the mat later, but for right now it's where the track is looking to follow the image. Now I need to point out that because we're tracking a pattern of pixels that's moving relative to itself, or a texture moving in one direction, you need to not use this like a point or feature tracker. Do you see how it's not looking for specific edges, how it's not looking for specific features? If you try to use Mocha's planar tracker, like a feature tracker or a point tracker, you're going to get very frustrated. Think of it as planar data. Think of it as tracking a single plane on a low poly model for those of you who play video games. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to come in here and I'm going to make my roto shape a little bit tighter around this shoe. Because what we're actually going to do is we're going to use this roto shape to hold out some of our data from the insert that we're going to put on this skateboard. So let's just tighten that up. Now you see how we tightened that up on the keyframe that we originally tracked on? Now it's going to be a little tighter for the entirety of the shape. We can do that, or if we had wanted to use the Uber key, we could also have adjusted using the Uber key, which does essentially a ripple edit over time. But we're not actually going to use that. Instead, we're going to use the Auto key, and we're going to keyframe between the two sections that we made. So in this case, I'm going to come in here, and as we start to get off of our data, like we're going to look for the places where we're the most off. So I'm going to go to the end frame, and I'm going to adjust my shape. And you see we're going to tween between those two shapes. Now what we're actually going to do as well is we're going to look for areas where we're the most off in our tweening. So in this case, we're just going to animate here. Now if you ever want to get rid of these thumbnail views here, a lot of times people like them when they roto, but they actually bug me. So you can always turn your thumbnails off right here. And we're just going to continue to roto outside of this shoe shape. Now it doesn't have to be really nice outside over here, but it needs to be nicer on the inside where we're going to put this over our insert. Doing it the right way, I'll pull this shape out here just so you can see how I would roto that whole foot. All right, now again we're going to tighten up here where we need to. All right. Okay. We're going to check out and see what our roto shape looks like. All right, so that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to track our skateboard. Now, this is going to be a slightly difficult track because there's not a whole lot of texture here to track, but we're going to cheat a little bit. We're going to turn our gear off because this is our action item on our foot track layer. We're going to lock this layer, and we're going to leave it on so that you guys can see what the shape is doing. Now, Mocha treats everything at the top of the layer pile as if it is closest to the camera, and everything at the bottom of the layer pile as if it's furthest from the camera. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to track this underneath our foot layer. Now that will give us a more accurate track. So I'm going to take my X-Spline tool, and I'm going to grab the board in the middle here a little bit. And you see I'm coming outside the board. Mocha is smart enough to determine what is relevant data and what isn't, so we're going to use the outside of this board to get a better track. I'm going to call this board track. And we're going to drag this underneath foot track, because like I said, Mocha treats everything at the top of the layer pile as closest to the camera. Everything at the bottom of the layer pile is furthest from the camera, and it holds out all the top layers from the bottom. This is user-defined. Mocha will not do this for you. You have to tell it what layers are in front of one another. Think of it as layers in Photoshop, or layers in After Effects. Now, we're going to turn our surface tool on, and we're actually going to align our surface tool to this board. We don't actually have to do this, but this is really helpful when we want to see whether or not we have a good track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to align the surface tool to the board so that I can see what the track should look like if this board were completely straight. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. Okay, now translation is basically where the object is moving, right? Scale is how the object is growing in size or not. Rotation is how the object is rotating. Shear is how the object is skewing. And perspective is that skew in z-space, so it's going to be the tilt of this board. Z-space is a reference to x, y, and z-space, which actually defines most 3D space. All right, we're going to turn our grid on as well, and we're going to leave stabilize on because I'd actually like to leave this into the center of the screen, and we're going to start tracking backwards. Okay, now you see how we lost our track there. We lost our track there because we stopped tracking the front of the object. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to switch it to just translation, scale, and rotation for a minute, and we're going to let that continue to track back. Now again, we still lose a little bit of the track towards the very end, okay? So we're just going to switch it to translation and keep tracking. So what we'll end up with is we'll end up with a nice way to transition between our tracks. And at this point, we've lost our tracking data, but we actually don't need that tracking data because we can't see the board at this point. So we're going to set an endpoint here for our track and continue forward. I think I'll actually set an endpoint on this frame. Okay? So now, this is where our tracking data comes into play. So, we're going to continue to track forward until we lose it. And again, we're going to figure out why we have lost it. Now we've lost it again because the tracking data is gone. And what I mean by that is the plane that we were trying to track is no longer visible. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to switch to translation only, and we are going to track the next couple of frames. We can even change our shape to grab more information to track translation only. So in this case, we'll actually use the selection tool. And we're going to grab more of this shoe here. Let me turn the surface tool off. Grab more of this shoe here. And we're going to track forwards. And now we don't need the data anymore for that tilt. And now we can switch back down to perspective and continue our track. Now, the important thing to note here is that you can change your track at any time. And if for some reason I feel like I need more data, so if in this case, if I think I need more foot data in order to get the track of the board, what I can actually do is I can extend my shape. I can even drag it up on top of my board track. I'm sorry, up on top of my foot track, and we can continue to track that forward. Now what that will do is that will give us more tracking data without sacrificing all of our information. Now again, because we have that foot there, we might be losing the data that we would like to have because that will be actually contaminating our data as it tilts. So let's just go ahead and turn our surface tool on and see how we think that looks. Now I don't actually think that looks correct. I feel like it's correct here, but we're losing it here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to turn perspective off. I'm going to just use shear. We're going to follow that through the shot. All right, so now that we have our tracking data, how do we get this into After Effects, and what do we do with it? Well, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure our surface tool is exactly where we want it. So I'm going to go ahead and overscan my surface tool here so that we have a surface tool that is large enough to cover our board to the edges, and we'll use Roto to blend between the two. So let's just go ahead and look at how that looks. All right, so now how do we export our data? Well, we're going to go to Export Tracking Data. So in this case, we're going to export our tracking data as After Effects Transform Data or as After Effects Corner Pin. So let me show you the difference. If we export our transform data, we go to Copy to Clipboard, we select After Effects Transform Data, make sure we're on our board track layer, and we hit Copy to Clipboard, right? We go back over to After Effects, we go Layer, New, Null Object, and we're going to hit Edit, Paste, making sure that we're on our first frame as usual. And now we will have a null object moving along with our skateboard that we can start attaching objects to if we want. But what we're actually going to do here is we're going to put a corner pin onto this skateboard. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to delete this null. And we're going to go back over to Mocha for After Effects. Now I'm going to go to Export Tracking Data, and I'm going to export my After Effects corner pin, Supports Motion Blur. And we're going to copy that right to the clipboard. And we're going to jump back over to After Effects. Now, we can put any sort of object we want on top of this. So one of the things we can do is we can find an image we want to put on top of this skateboard. And in this case, what we're actually going to do is we're going to load up a pinup that I drew a little while back, and we're going to put this pinup on top of our skateboard. So I'm going to go ahead and load up After Effects, and we're going to go to File, Import, and I'm actually going to, this is a PNG, so I'm actually going to import this PNG. So we're going to go to Import File, and we go to our PNG here, we import this into our shot. You can see it's got a transparent background. We're going to drag this over the top of our image here, and what you can see that again it's transparent, and we're going to go to Layer, Pre-Compose, or you can just hit Control-Shift-C. Okay, and we're going to call this Skate Insert. I feel like a pinup is appropriate to to skateboarding culture. We're going to move all our attributes into the new composition. We're going to hit OK. And what we're actually going to do here is we're going to open up our comp, and you see that this isn't quite right. Okay, so we're going to select our layer inside of our pre-composition, and we're going to go to Layer, Transform, Fit to Comp. And now this will squish our image, but the reason we're doing this is because of the way After Effects treats pre-comps and corner pins. So we want our corner pin to line up according to where our surface tool is inside of Mocha, so we're going to use this trick. We're going to align this to the edges of our comp, making sure that our comp was again the same size as our image, and we are going to make sure we're on the first frame. We're going to go over to Mocha. We're going to make sure that we have exported our tracking data, which we did earlier, so we're just going to copy that to the clipboard. And we're going to go back to After Effects. We select our composition and we go to Edit, Paste. If we've done everything correctly, it should move along with our shot. Now this doesn't look to me like it's lining up, so let's figure out why that is. Well, it turns out why that is because our keyframes are all pasted in on the first frame when they should probably be pasted in on the 14th frame. If you remember, we have trimmed our in and out points on our track to the 14th frame. Now, if we go back over to After Effects, what we can do is we can very simply just select all of our keyframes and drag them to the end of the shot, like so. And I'm actually going to trim the layer itself to that so that we don't have the image running off the screen. And so what you'll see is that our image now moves along with our skateboard. So what we can do from here is we can go ahead and we can blending mode this layer into the skateboard. So in this case, I think I'm going to do a soft light to sort of make it look like it belongs on the skateboard. Let's just zoom in here so you can see what I'm talking about. And I think what we're actually going to do as well is I think I'm going to also go to Effect, and I think I'm going to go to Noise and Grain, and I'm going to match the grain to the original plate. In this case, we just go ahead and put this on Final, and our noise source layer is going to be our original movie. So now that will have noise in it that is appropriate to the actual image itself. I'm also going to take the opacity down. So in this case, we're just going to drag the opacity of this layer down a little bit to make it match the shot better. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to zoom out now and we're going to adjust some roto on this. So what I will do is I will come over here, and what I really like to do is I like to take the original image and drop it over the top. So in this case, we're going to go to our skateboarding movie. I'm going to drag this to the top of my comp, and I'm going to go back over to my Mocha for After Effects layer. I'm going to select my foot track, which is also my roto shape for my foot, and I'm going to go to Export Shape Data. I'm just going to copy that to the clipboard. We're going to jump back over to After Effects, and I'm going to go to Edit, Paste, and what you'll see here is I now have my foot above that layer. And we can do the same thing for this back foot. So if I wanted, I could go ahead and go to After Effects, zoom in on this back foot. We can put a little roto shape around this back foot. just a very loose one. And we can actually call this back foot. And we can hook this actually up to board track because the back foot actually moves a lot with the board. So we'll just hook this up to board track. And we'll adjust the roto where we need to. We'll turn stabilize on so that we can really get this roto correct. Because again, we don't need to roto the whole foot. We just need to pull out the part that is underneath the sneaker. So that should be good enough. All right, so we'll just go ahead and export that shape data. We're going to copy the clipboard, go back over to After Effects, and we're going to go to make sure we're on our first frame. And we're going to go ahead and go to Edit, Paste. And you can see we have our roto shapes over the top. Now if we want, we don't have to paste this in as an effect. What I like to do actually is, let's delete these effects, is actually go and edit Paste Mocha Mask and paste these in as masks because I have a lot more control that way. So for instance, with this back foot here, if I want to expand the mask, I can. If I want to feather it a little bit, I can. So in this case, I could feather it, expand it, and I could do the same thing for the front. So I could go ahead and feather it a little bit. In this case, I think we'll just feather it 2 pixels and call it a day because that pretty much demonstrates what I wanted to show you guys, which is how to track an object to a skateboard. So let's zoom out so you can see. We're going to go ahead and show you what that looks like. And you can see that our corner pin is sticking on and that our object is sticking on. So that is how you put a corner pin into After Effects and the difference between a corner pin and transform data. And then it's also using roto and masking shapes over the top in order to get a rock solid track. If you guys have any questions, I am Mary Poplin and I am happy to answer them. I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and I hope you have a wonderful day.